I do have a little bit of a spring break. I should probably show you this now. It's a good time to bring out the duck riding the bicycle, right? Tricycle, I'm sorry. Science. Keep going. It's starting to get old. The best part about this, there's a sticker that's kind of worn off, but it says "Keep out of the hands of children," which I think is hilarious. Get that ant! Get the ant! Oh, so close! You better run, ant. By the way, this is the AP class. Okay, so with that. Oh no! Christian. I'm sorry. Yeah, you're not going to beat me that easy. All right, so everyone's got the packet. If it's not in order, because I literally just stacked things together and stapled it. So here's, and I'm a firm believer in the little boxes. And then the next page is that gathering storm. And then I don't know what I'm doing traffic to this fair. I've not decided yet. But the maps and directions for the map. And same thing with Total War. I've not decided. But I just stuck them in there, so you have to rip them off carefully and hand them in. You can handle that. I think most of you probably can rip them. Few of you are like, no. Well, I'm sure there's a video on YouTube. So with that, and so we got to finish up the Great Depression. So let's go ahead and take out your notes. Oh, and I did post the extra credit stuff, and that'll be due yesterday. And so it's going to be very easy to grade. So Monday, we got Thursday, and if there's any questions on it, then I'm not going to check very much, but I will do some things and get stuff ready. But we got to do it this way. But what after the AP exam? It's going to be nothing but what?
Pull-ups.
Just
Oh,
we will do some time on it. We talked about this yesterday.
Oh, yeah, you have 4 minutes. No, we had 4 minutes.
No, we didn't. My people are working on it right now. In fact, I'm addressing. Yeah, we're starting to go back on. Yes.
Could you play like life-size chess and where the pieces, and if you get taken, like you just like leave the class.
You be disappeared. Okay, so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll drop stuff on the floor like when they bowl upstairs. All right, so we got through. All right, so let's go and get to work. Causes of the Great Depression, big deal. And the thing about it is I spent time on that. But there are common things in every depression. And I know you're about 4-minute miles. Don't forget 4-minute mile. You don't make it. What do you got to do? Keep going until you get it. Yeah. Practice makes perfect. So with that, once again, that's science. Don't look into the light. I looked into the light. Don't do that. LBJ fell. All right. So with that, we went through debt deflation, didn't we? Yeah. So we covered debt deflation, and then don't forget the thing about debt deflation. It's this constant that drives down the economy. Prices go down, yet no one can afford anything. Those with money don't spend anything, and it's just this horrible cycle. And the whole thing is that it just keeps pushing down demand. And everything you notice will push down demand. You oversupply after demand, what happens to prices? They do what? If there's oversupply, they drop. Yeah, be the other way around because they can't sell their goods, so they got to cut prices. And the gap between the rich and the poor, it's demand, because eventually those without money will just can't buy anymore. And in fact, I was just reading this thing about what's happening in Guatemala and Honduras. There's the top about 1% has something like 80% of the wealth. And so it's just desperately poor. And so I think you get the idea why so many people are either turned to crime or what's happening there. There's been some trade agreements that have hammered them and things like that, but that's another story. And what's the other one? I'm forgetting something. Oh, speculation. And speculation in the stock market. And oh, there's no regulation on what? Yeah, speculation about what? What things? Yeah, banking. So banks can make all kinds of risky loans. And that's where you get this whole thing built upon debt. And so we got debt deflation. Did we get to?
We got to failure of government.
Failure of government. So government makes the rules. So government has immense power in this. Immense power in what goes on. And so one of the big things where there's no regulation, as we said before, of banks or stock. So they didn't have to keep, there are no rules on loans, no rules on reserves, and people could lie about how much their company was worth. They could do insider trading and come up, and which is by definition fraud, and come up with sweetheart deals that, yes, still happen. Laws only matter if they're enforced. We'll see. And next, there's no safety net. Did we get to this?
Yes.
So we got the safety net, unemployment insurance. Yep. And then we get to the Federal Reserve.
Yep.
So we got here.
Yep.
Did we get the tariff?
No.
So, oh, what's the interest rates now? Did I tell you that? Yeah, they're effectively zero. In fact, by definition, that means they're negative, which is just mind-boggling. But you know, government debt right now is negative interest in real terms. People have so much extra money that they're just scooping up government bonds. So, the Hawley-Smoot tariff. The Hawley-Smoot tariff is one of the most famous bills ever, and as we all know, I said it completely incorrectly, didn't I? It's the Hawley-Smoot tariff. And so the Hawley-Smoot tariff, yeah, they want to hear me upstairs? Yeah, I'm sure Mr. Larson.
I was like partially asleep, but now I'm completely awake.
Thank you for admitting that. So with that, so the thought was they would increase the tariff and protect American industry. If factories aren't selling goods, let's drive out foreign competition. So this was a massive increase in the tariff. And this is exactly the wrong thing to do. Because tariffs raise all prices. Tariffs are tax. So it bumps up prices for everything. This is the exact wrong thing to do if people don't have money because there's mass unemployment. But the big thing was this. Every other country in the world, they had tariffs too, and they saw the US increase their tariff by some 40%, and this is going to trigger a trade war. They raised their tariffs. So all these countries who had a surplus of goods could not trade in because of the high tariffs. This froze international trade for the rest of the decade. And there's little doubt that this would help encourage the events that led to World War II. But not only that, made the Depression worse. So this was people thinking basically like a very narrow-minded, so if they're in business, they're small business and just thinking, okay, if I drive out competition, I'll make more money. No, because government policy is macro, it's over the entire country. And this hurt the prosperity of everybody. Bad policy. That's 1930, if I didn't say the year. Did I say the year? 1930. So, but the biggest, we give the generic name of austerity. And austerity is cutting government spending. So cutting back on government spending. Now, there might or might not be times, good times to cut back on government spending, but during a depression, it can be absolutely deadly. Because, well, let's look what happens, why austerity happens first. What happens is this. Every single time there's a depression, you can imagine wages go down. If wages go down, taxes go down. People don't have as much money, they don't pay taxes, and they don't buy as much. So taxes go down, deficits go up. because government spending is still there, or government might even spend more if there's a depression going on. This is happening right now. Part of the reason why government debt has gone up is because tax revenues have dropped, combined with more impact or more need for government spending. And so deficits will go up in bad times, every single time. But there's going to be a cry, especially for people who don't want the government to spend the money on things like roads or bridges, or because this might lead to tax increases down the road and things like that. But there's going to be this idea that, wait a minute, people all over the United States they have to tighten their belt, save money because they're in debt and depression. So shouldn't government do it? And this is a cartoon from 1931. Talks about the slight increase in government spending in 31 and saying, save the money for bad times. Don't spend it now because everyone's suffering. It's happened, it's going to really hit in 1932. Same thing happened in your lifetime, 2010, in the middle of the Great Recession. The Obama administration dramatically cut back on spending. In fact, the number of people who had government jobs dropped in 2010, 2011. So, and this is by definition a relatively, we would say this is more a conservative idea because it goes against trickle-down economics. And so government actually cut spending in 32 because deficits were going up. Now, deficits then have a greater impact than deficits now because we were on the gold standard. We as the United States, not like we in this pyramid classroom. So the U.S. had to pay back in gold. It's a lot different today. We pay back in dollars. And dollars we actually print, we make them. We can't make gold, but we can make dollars. So it's different today. Not for individuals, but for federal governments, if they make their own currency. But with that, in 1932, they cut spending. And the big thing this was, it absolutely killed demand. Government was, okay, spending money. They did things like they started building more roads and building dams in 1930-31. This is called public works. Today we would call it infrastructure. Nobody would have used the word infrastructure. In fact, it was basically unknown. Right now, President Biden is pledging a $3 to $4 trillion infrastructure. It's got to pass through Congress and all that, but that's the same kind of thing. And so it's the same kind of thing. So have you heard of Hoover Dam? Which, if you ever get a chance, go, it's pretty spectacular. There are problems with dams, but I'm still just in awe of dams. But they started construction even though almost all the money would be under the Roosevelt administration. But then in 32, they cut back on that spending. Because the thought was, okay, we have to save money. Well, all of a sudden the government, which in 31 was at least stepping into the void of the fact that consumer demand was dropping. And people weren't buying stuff, so the government filled in. Does that make sense? But also now the government isn't buying anything either. So demand dropped. People aren't buying things in 32. We talked about that with debt deflation. Government isn't buying anything. So austerity made the winter of 32 the worst year of the Depression. The worst time of the Depression, by the way. In fact, it was during the winter that the country just about ended. We had about a full-scale revolution, and it was just about over. Especially after the election, the 5 months between the election and the inauguration. And it's no coincidence that other countries did the same thing. This was a worldwide depression. So Britain did it. France stubbornly refused to spend money. Boy, this would hurt them in the years leading up to World War II. The country that would be best known for this massive austerity in 31 and 32 was this country you might have heard of it called Germany. And I wonder if there's going to be a political party that's going to pledge to end austerity. It could be any party.
What's that called? Foreshadowing.
Yeah, this is what we call foreshadowing, yes. So, this will lengthen the Depression. So in 2010, when the big cutback in spending, without doubt, kept the recovery way too slow. And actually, this was President Obama economically was pretty conservative, and it really hurt him politically. even though he got reelected, Democrats did not do well. And it's kind of like politics. If you give people stuff, they vote for it. Now we make an argument if that's a good thing or bad thing, but they vote for you. And without a doubt, it helped. A stimulus check helped Republicans in this last election. Not necessarily the president, but other Republicans. And so with that leads to number 7, the loss of confidence. Depression, remember bubbles that go on forever? There's like the euphoria, we're all going to get rich. And in depression, it's doom. We're all going to die. And there's going to be a massive loss in confidence. And first, people begin to lose faith in themselves. This idea that I'm a failure for losing my job. I'm a failure for letting down my family. A phenomenon that happens in every depression, every bad economic times. Divorce rates go up. Abandonment of families go up. Also, childbirth goes up. I better not have a kid. I better wait till I know things are better. Yes, that happened in 2009, 2010. It's happening now. This is a different type of recession, so it might just explode afterwards, who knows. But then people start losing faith in the government. The political system, they start losing faith in their leaders, parties might become more radical, and we see this every time. But the scary thing is when people lose faith in the whole system, the economic system, and not just the government itself who runs it, I mean the actual Constitution. And there's going to be serious talk in the United States in 1932 and 33. We got to get rid of the Constitution. We need a dictatorship. And some of the richest people in America actually organized a coup to overthrow Roosevelt and replace it with a fascist dictatorship. They loved Mussolini. Loved. And it might have worked, but they went to the wrong general to try to lead it. I'll show you the general in a few minutes. But, so, here's the point. It can happen here. It can. We're not immune. We saw an insurrection that seemed to be much more planned than people thought on January 6th. It can happen here. So at that, here's a good one though. Look at calling these shanty towns that people were forced to live in when they lost their homes and lost everything, Hooverville. That's a big loss of faith of the government. He's president, isn't it? And lines like this, and the humiliation that people would suffer, they had to go ask for help. It's just, that's what you see losing faith in yourself. It's so awful. That's where you get a lot of just like husbands abandoning their family. It's a tragedy. A tragedy. There's probably no time in history of the United States where there are more single parent families than during the Great Depression. They just didn't keep track of it because of one spouse abandoning the other because of this, which is just adds on to the hell of this. And who would take advantage of such loss in systems in this? I thought that was a good time to mention a little more foreshadowing. I'll put you back away. Up to the austerity. You notice? Handing out tools, Arbeit, work. It's no coincidence that Hitler would use this to advantage, take a small minor joke of a party with the Depression to become not the majority, but the largest party in Germany, and fear of socialists led him to become chancellor. It's kind of weird. 2 months after that, the exact opposite style of politician would take power in the United States, Franklin Roosevelt. Kind of interesting how that happened. But, so here, I put this graph up here. That is the war sheet, 32. So 32, let's get to 1932, even though we talked about the new heading, new title, the New Deal, and the 1930s. The New Deal and the 1930s. And that's Roosevelt, and here he is with all the new programs he would create. Roosevelt promised direct action. And so with that, let's get to one of the first big things. The year was an awful year. And right down the bonus army, but there's going to be rioting in front of Ford Automobile Company when Ford shut his doors and quit production. Unemployment in Detroit was 50%. Unemployment in Akron and Toledo, Ohio were over 90% because everybody was either somewhat directly or indirectly employed in making tires or spark plugs. If there's no cars, there's no tires. And you saw this in sections of New York, where the unemployment rate would be in some areas of the Bronx would be as high as 80%. Some areas not as high. It was relatively uneven. And the agricultural section of the economy was in literal free fall. Well, a significant number of veterans of World War I, who, don't forget, this was a time, if you think about veterans today, and there's a Veterans Administration, and they have health care, and it's actually kind of an amusing thing. In the newspaper, they've had a picture of one man in his early 80s who's been vaccinated. He got the vaccine pretty early at the VA, and he's been the front page of the newspaper 4 times that one picture. And the reason I say it because that's my wife's stepfather. And they keep showing him over and over again. Whenever they talk about vaccines, they keep showing this picture. So last week, the VA said all veterans will be able to get a vaccine regardless of their age at the VA. They showed the same picture of him again. So 4 times, he's a star. But it's actually really fun. But like the Veterans Administration and Hospital Care for Veterans, or the GI Bill, which I think I mentioned before, but that would come about during World War II, which is college education. In fact, I was just talking to someone here who went to the Army was in the Navy for 4 years and then used the GI Bill to pay for college. And some of you might be thinking about that because college is not only very expensive, it will go up. Today they just announced that 650,000 employees at colleges, professors, adjunct professors, workers have been laid off in the last 6 months. Nationwide. So what that means is colleges don't have much money, so college expenses almost certainly will go up dramatically, just in time for you to go to college. No, I don't think it's good. I'm just telling you the way this is coming down the road. Montana, yes, they will go up.
I'm pretty sure it's colleges don't have much money, or the people in power are making more profit and less to them.
Well, it could be for private schools, but for public schools, they're getting cutbacks from the state government. So they're basically told, you have to cut back. Like University of Montana is going to cut back about $3.5 million, which for University of Montana is huge. So they're going to lay off a bunch of professors, and then tuition will happen. And I don't know the exact number of families you, but it'll happen there. But you're right. But think in terms of state government.
Yeah.
But back to this then. So before though World War II and the New Deal, veterans got nothing. There's a little bit of a bonus and pension for some veterans after the Civil War, but after World War I, the veterans got home, they got $100 and a suit. And that was it. Then good luck. But in the 1920s, they voted a bonus. A bonus for veterans that they would get in 1945. The idea was they'd get a little bit extra money when they're too old to work anymore. This new thing called retirement. So that was the plan, just a little bit of money. Well, in 1932, veterans, desperate, absolutely terrified, 14,000, did I put 45? It's supposed to be 45, not 54. Of course, when I first started teaching, I taught regular American history as opposed to this irregular class. But the textbook we had Columbus arrived in the New World in 1942. Mm-hmm. And so it's easy to do. And I thought, how do you make it past the U-boats? All right, so with that, so 1945. Well, that summer, 14,000 veterans, and many of them brought their families, so thousands more. This shows you how desperate and terrified. People just don't often get up. I'm going to march on Washington, D.C. for $500. No, they are terrified. These are bad times. as the wind shows. They marched on Washington, D.C. to demand their bonus. Now, this should remind you of the Coxey's March, Coxey Army. But also, one more thing we should know about the 1920s. There were all these countries who fought in World War I, and veterans were being mistreated and had nothing and felt left out, and they were never quite the same. And they joined these kind of paramilitary groups. So, for example, it was veterans of World War I who dubbed themselves the Black Shirts, funded by some of the richest men in Italy, that would help Mussolini take power in the fascists. The backbone of the Nazis were veterans of World War I. In fact, that's where Hitler got his credibility. He was a war hero, so he could appeal to them. And so this kind of looks like it, doesn't it? Yes.
And relating to that, don't forget the leader, the founder of the militia that's going to meet in East Helena at the church is a former Navy man. So.
Veterans have a lot of this, yeah, and there's a lot of disillusionment. I don't think there's any coincidence, too,
Oh, no.
that there's a war, and then the veterans coming back from the war, what happens after every war, veterans are basically ignored, which is just a crime. I mean, sure, they'll count people away to flag at football games or something, but they're just ignored.
No, it's no coincidence that vets are often caused
Or left, I mean, it could be anything, but they just feel totally left out. It's no coincidence that we have a lot of that now, without a doubt. Without a doubt. We saw the same thing after World War I. We didn't see it as much after World War II, but that's because we had a general era of prosperity. We have not had that since most of the time after this war that we just went through. There's been 2 depressions since while we've been at war. So the big thing is Hoover generally ignored this. Now, I'm going to be clear about it. He did have the Army provide tents and rations. And they set up kitchens and cooked kind of stuff. But for the most part, they ignored it. And they set up tent in this little marshy area just to the west of Washington, D.C. It's in D.C. still, but it's called Anacostia Flats. Now it's been built up. In fact, it's pretty, since it's in a swampy area, it's a forest area town. But they set up kind of the biggest Hooverville in America, over 10,000 people. And they occupied a bunch of the empty buildings. During the Depression, there's going to be a lot of empty buildings. And they marched on Washington, D.C. to get the vote, to get the bonus. And the House did pass it. But the Senate was specifically created. I gotta be very clear about this. The Senate was meant to be a check on the turbulent House, because the House were directly elected by the people. And when the Constitution was written, the Senate was picked by state assemblymen. So the House voted yes, the Senate voted no. Hoover did not want this bonus bill. Hoover believed that if you gave these veterans of World War I this money, they would quit working, they would come back every year and ask for more money, they would use this money to get drunk, they will blow it on frivolous things. You can't give people like that money. By the way, what philosophy is that? He's social Darwinistic. He definitely believes that some people you can't help, because if you help them, they have no real control over themselves, and that's what's going to happen. So, we're going to jump ahead. We're not going to jump ahead. Here we go. So we're going to watch part of this video. It's from the Great Depression series, great series. In normal years, when I had more time, I would show more of this one. But such is life, right? But it's made in the early 1980s. It's really well done. And so I will show you another part of it when we get to the beginning of the New Deal and the WPA. But this talks about what happens then at the end.
All I got gone.
And from that moment on,
My bonus, and I'm going to wait for till I get it if I have to wait till 1945.
Senator Gore, my grandfather, didn't believe in giving anybody anything, so he was opposed to the bonus. I went with my grandfather from his house in Rock Creek Park. He had a big, long, black Packard car. And a driver called Davis, and I sat in the back of the car. And as we drove down Pennsylvania Avenue on both sides for the bonus army, as we approached the Senate side of the Capitol. They recognized Senator Gore, and they began to stone the car. And from that moment on, I knew that it could happen here, and that one day we might indeed have a revolution, and it would be rich against poor.
That's Gorbadell won the.
The veterans were determined to force Congress to reconsider. Over the next few weeks, as the government watched with concern, the population of the camps increased to over 20,000. Anacostia became the nation's most famous Hooverville.
Don't forget how.
I'm just a poor ex-soldier that's broken down and blue. I fought out in the Great World War for the old red, white, and blue.
On assignment for the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, Roy Wilkins visited Anacostia and found black and white vets living side by side, although Washington and the U.S. military were still strictly segregated.
There was a sort of a leveling process as these people got together, and there was a sense of solidarity and a sense of responsibility to give a good account of themselves. They tried to give little homey touches to the hovels they lived in. Some of them were built of cardboard, some of tin sheeting, some of wood, and a number of them had planted little gardens.
The Bonus Army had occupied Washington for more than 2 months. With Congress scheduled to adjourn, the veterans mounted a final protest. For more than 3 days, they marched in front of the Capitol in slow, shuffling relays of tired men. The Washington press called it a death march.
The atmosphere around the Capitol building was very strange during the death march. There was a sense of sadness, of desperation. The thing we couldn't forget was that the pavement was so hot, and with these bare feet, it must have been a very painful thing.
We were practically begging for our money.
As the vigil wore on, official Washington began to feel under siege.
We drove through Washington as fast as we could. We didn't feel comfortable stopping at stop sign, especially along Pennsylvania Avenue. And I had to cross Pennsylvania Avenue to get into the White House. And we rolled up our windows and locked our doors, and well, it was a ragtag bunch of people. It was a mess there in Washington, and we weren't happy about it one bit.
Tradition called for the president to come to Capitol Hill and close Congress. As the Senate debated on its last day, Hoover's limousine waited.
It was a dramatic moment, on the one hand, where the Congress with the power to make or break some of these people. There was a president who sat in his well-guarded White House. The streets were cut off, were taped off.
All in favor, say aye.
Fearful for the president's safety, the Secret Service did not let Hoover come to the Capitol. A few minutes before midnight, Congress adjourned without reconsidering the bonus bill. Members of Congress left through underground tunnels to avoid the veterans waiting outside.
Take it from me.
Here's
This is the greatest demonstration of Americanism we've ever had. Pure Americanism. Willing to take this beating as you've taken it. Stand right steady. You keep every law. And why in the hell shouldn't you? Who in the hell has done all the bleeding for this country and for this law and this Constitution anyhow but you fellas? But don't take a step back. Remember, as soon as you haul down your camp flag here, then clear out this thing, every one of you clears out, this evaporates in thin air. And all this struggle will have been no good.
Washington authorities wanted their city back. 12 days after Congress adjourned, the district commissioners ordered police to evict the veterans from the buildings on Pennsylvania Avenue. 1,000 angry veterans poured across the bridge from the main camp at Anacostia into downtown.
We had no training, special training to handle riots. Veterans refused to move. They got bricks and started throwing at the policemen. Several of the policemen were hurt, and some of the policemen picked up bricks and threw them back at the veterans.
Then the police opened fire. One veteran was killed. Another lay dying. City commissioners now requested that the president call out the military. By 4 o'clock, Army troops were in position behind the White House.
I had a press card, and I used it to get through the police line. And I saw advancing towards us some cavalry, some marching troops, a couple of not too formidable whippet tanks. And I suddenly realized that the commander was the Chief of Staff of the United States at the time, General MacArthur. And that assisting him were two majors, Major George Patton, and the other was Major Dwight D. Eisenhower.
The cavalry men pulled their sabers out of their scabbards. The troops fixed bayonets.
I heard a bugle sound, and they all drew their sabers, and then another bugle sound, and they started, the whole line started forward at a walk.
MacArthur's orders from Hoover were to surround the area on Pennsylvania Avenue and clear it without delay. In violation of those orders, MacArthur began to clear the entire city of the bonus army.
Here were young fellows, of course a lot younger than most of the veterans, were charged with going out and actually using force against people that had fought for the United States in World War I.
The men who had been under fire in Europe, and this was nothing new to them, kept the proper distance, and when a canister of tear gas would be thrown, part of the time they'd throw it back.
It was a feeling of frustration. You wanted to help both of them. You know you couldn't do anything. It was something that I'll never forget.
I happened to be near General MacArthur, and I saw him speak to a sergeant, and then I saw the sergeant collect a squad and then go down the row of ramshackle huts, and they'd throw a wad of newspaper into a corner of a hut and set that alight. And they went right down the whole row that way, and pretty soon the whole row was burning.
While MacArthur's troops mopped up downtown, 3 of his tanks held the bridge leading to Anacostia. Trapped inside the camp with the veterans were 600 of their wives and children.
My father was away in the tent. Came back and told my mother that they were going to march on the Capitol. They was going to march in force. And, of course, my mother was a little upset about it. When we started across the bridge and I saw these soldiers, and I've never seen tanks and soldiers on horses and soldiers with bayonets before, and and my father was pretty headstrong. I didn't know whether he was going to try to go through them or not, but it was frightening. I remember very well. It was something I'll never forget.
Twice that night, Hoover ordered MacArthur not to cross into Anacostia, but the general chose to ignore presidential authority. A few minutes after 11 p.m., he sent his troops across the bridge. By midnight, all of Washington could see Anacostia burning.
So imagine a lobby if I heard the name MacArthur before. You're the highest ranking U.S. soldier in the U.S. Army.
What had gone on reinforced my feeling that it was too bad that the richest country in the world couldn't do a better job of caring for its own people. I just thought America didn't give a very good account of itself that night.
It's pretty amazing. You have the same kind of people were the soldiers and the veterans.
While the ruins of Anacostia smoldered, bonus marchers filled the roads leaving the capital. As the men retreated, General MacArthur reported that the veterans had intended to take over the government.
So,
although MacArthur had violated...
By no means were they planning on taking over the government. Why do you have your phone out now? We're not done. Again, I know we're about at spring break, but no. So, MacArthur said they were going to overthrow the government. By no means were they going to overthrow the government. But they ran them out, and you can imagine what's going to happen. Hoover is going to be blamed for this. How much direct blame, we don't know. But he definitely is going to be blamed. Now, if there's any questions about this, please ask. But this will be due on, what, 2 different due dates? And that's it. All right. No, we're not.